Some places are too perfect to be real, and some kindnesses come at a cost. Tonight, we follow Nathan, a survivor hardened by a lifetime of abandonment, on his journey to a mountain town where every smile hides a secret and every welcome is a warning. But remember, in a story like this, the climb is only the beginning. Welcome to Ash Grove. Let's begin. The old bus rattled and groaned as it climbed the winding mountain road. The windows buzzed in their frames, and the cracked leather seats exhaled dust with every bump. Nathan shifted, trying to get comfortable. He had learned long ago that comfort was a luxury, not a right. He stared out the window as dense forests unfurled below. Pine trees swayed in the distance like watchful sentinels, their shadows crawling over the earth. A sign flickered past. Welcome to Ash Grove. Nathan's fingers tightened around the small duffel bag in his lap. It held everything he owned. A change of clothes, a book he'd stolen from the last place, and a worn leather notebook with pages filled with messy sketches and scraps of memories. The bus jolted, and he remembered. He remembered the first foster home, the one where the older boys locked him in the cellar and whispered stories of monsters in the dark. He remembered the cracked cement walls of the group home, where punishment was isolation in a cramped box barely wide enough to sit. He remembered waking up hungry more mornings than not, his stomach a gnawing hollow that taught him to steal. He learned early. People who smiled at you wanted something. Trust was a weakness. Survival was solitary. The bus shuddered to a stop, kicking up dust. The driver grunted, "End of the line." Nathan hesitated as the doors groaned open. The mountain air rushed in, crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine sap and wildflowers. The town of Ash Grove lay nestled in a valley ahead, postcard perfect. Wooden cottages with green shutters, white picket fences, and flower boxes bursting with color. There was a rightness to it all that made Nathan's skin crawl. A group of people stood at the edge of the gravel road waving. Their faces were open and warm, eyes crinkling with smiles. "Welcome," a woman called out, her voice bright. Nathan adjusted his bag and stepped off the bus. "You must be Nathan," the woman said as she approached. She was middle-aged, her silver hair tied back neatly. She held out her hand. "I'm Miriam. We've been expecting you." Nathan hesitated before taking her hand. Her grip was firm and dry. For a second, he expected something else. A twist, a sudden pull. Nothing came. "Expecting me?" Miriam smiled. "Of course. We're always ready to help someone who needs a place to belong." The word belong sat heavy in the air. The other townsfolk gathered around. Introductions blurred together. He caught fragments. Jacob, the baker. Ruth, the school teacher. "Welcome, welcome." Each handshake and pat on the shoulder tightened the knot of suspicion in his chest. "You must be exhausted," Miriam said. "Come on, let's get you settled." Miriam's house was like something from a storybook. Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread and herbs. There were quilts draped over chairs and shelves lined with mason jars of preserves. Nathan was given a room at the back of the house. The bed was neatly made, the quilt patterned with autumn leaves. "Make yourself at home," Miriam said. "Dinner is at sundown." Nathan waited until her footsteps faded before he closed the door and sat on the bed. The mattress creaked under his weight. He stared at the floral wallpaper, eyes tracing the repeating pattern. He had seen this before. Not the wallpaper, but the way kindness wrapped around you like a net, soft until it tightened. Days passed in a blur of pleasantries. Everyone in Ash Grove was kind, unbearably so. Miriam woke early to make breakfast, always humming. Jacob gifted him a fresh loaf of rye. A stranger at the general store paid for his coffee, waving off his thanks with a grin. But there were cracks. At night, Nathan's dreams were restless. He saw shadowy figures with two wide smiles and heard chants in a language that twisted like smoke. One evening, he decided to walk to the edge of town. The houses thinned out near the tree line, replaced by open fields and a single dirt path that led up the mountain. He stopped when he saw the small chapel. It was old, its wooden beams gray with age. Candles burned faintly in the windows. He felt something then, a hum in the air like static. Curiosity pulled Nathan closer. He stepped to the side of the chapel and peered through a crack in the wall. Inside, the townsfolk had gathered. Miriam stood at the center, her face serene. Around her, the others formed a ring, their heads bowed. "Tonight," she whispered, "we give thanks." In unison, they began to chant. Nathan's breath caught in his throat as the air inside the chapel seemed to darken. A figure was dragged forward. A man, his wrists bound, his eyes wide with terror. Nathan wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Miriam raised a knife. The scream that followed was swallowed by the night. Nathan burst through the trees, the world tilting as adrenaline pulsed through his veins. His mind raced, tangled between disbelief and terror. By the time he reached Miriam's house, his legs felt like lead. He slammed the door shut and pressed his back against it, his chest heaving. He forced himself to breathe. He needed a plan. Nathan moved through the house on autopilot, checking windows and doors. The curtains swayed lightly, disturbed by the draft of his panic. Outside, the stars gleamed coldly, uncaring. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed his fists against his temples, trying to force the memories back into some dark corner of his mind. But every time he blinked, he saw that man's face, the raw panic in his eyes. The door creaked open behind him. Nathan turned so fast he almost fell. Miriam stood in the hallway, silhouetted by the dim lamplight. Her eyes were calm, her hands clasped in front of her. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. Nathan swallowed hard. "Just bad dreams." She nodded. "We all get those sometimes. But everything is okay now." The next morning was painfully bright. Miriam sat at the table, humming as she sliced bread. Nathan watched her hands work with calm precision. The sunlight poured in through the window, but to Nathan, the light felt harsh, exposing every shadow. By midday, Nathan had mapped the town in his head. He stuffed his notebook, a bottle of water, and a pack of crackers into his bag, and waited for night to fall. At night, the first thing he noticed was the silence. No crickets, no wind in the trees. He slipped out the back door and crept to the woods. But before he reached the tree line, he glanced back and saw the flickering procession of candles near the chapel. Nathan gritted his teeth and began the climb. The mountain path twisted upward, lined with jagged stones and tangled roots. Each step sent sharp jolts through his legs, but he pushed on. He reached the summit and staggered to a halt. The townsfolk were already there. Miriam stood at the center, her silhouette framed by a chasm pulsing with light and shadow. "You wanted to run," Miriam said, "but this was always where you were meant to be." The void whispered beneath his skin, "Belong." Nathan turned and ran. The hum grew louder. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was inside him. The world tilted. Nathan plunged into the abyss. For an instant, there was nothing but the roar of air rushing past him. Then everything went still. The shadows moved around him, not with malice, but with something warm. "You've come home," a voice whispered. And as his final breath slipped away, Nathan no longer felt the need to run. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, Nathan finally stopped running. But what about you? What would you do when the quiet town turns its gaze on you? Would you climb, or would you fall? If you enjoyed this story and want more tales that unravel the mind and chill the spine, Be sure to like the video and subscribe for more. And remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that feel like they could happen to anyone, even you.